Why did the entire hall fall silent, except her? The command cracked through the air like a whip. Not English, not French, not any language the foreign press corps could name. It was sharper, older, like a sound forged for urgency, not for poetry. It echoed across marble columns and bounced off chandeliers until the room seemed to vibrate. Soldiers froze, reporters frowned, unsure if this was staged. Even aides clustered near the stage stopped breathing. But Lena heard it differently. Her mop handle trembled in her grip. The voice, the syllables, the command, she knew them like she knew her own heartbeat. She had not heard them in years, and yet they pierced straight through the protective shell she had built around herself. Her body betrayed her before her mind caught up. Muscles tensed, breath shortened. Somewhere deep inside, memory stirred like a storm rolling back across a coastline she thought she'd abandoned. Her eyes lifted. The general. He stood at the podium, posture rigid, eyes sweeping the audience. The medals across his chest caught the chandelier light, sharp glints against dark fabric. His voice had fallen silent after the command, but his presence carried it still, like the lingering sting of a blade. He wasn't waiting for applause. He wasn't asking for understanding. He was searching. And he found her. Their eyes locked, the crowded hall blurred. Conversations became static. The mop in her hands suddenly weighed like a rifle. She hadn't worn a uniform in years. The gray janitor's outfit she wore now was supposed to make her invisible, part of the background, never the story. But in that moment, invisibility dissolved. Her chest tightened. That command, it was one only a handful of soldiers had ever known. It was a rally order, not in any manual, not in any training book. A field-born phrase, created in the dirt and fire of a forgotten conflict. She had heard it first on a night when the horizon was burning, when wounded bodies cried out for help, when survival hung by a thread that kept snapping in her hands. And the man who had barked it back then, she thought he had died. The general's gaze stayed on her. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She remembered too much. A soldier's blood soaking into her medic bag, the shrill ringing of artillery, the frantic press of her fingers against wounds she couldn't close fast enough. And always, that voice commanding her, anchoring her, forcing her to move when panic tried to chain her down. She thought she had buried that voice. But now it was here, alive, in the same hall where she had been scrubbing scuff marks off marble floors just minutes earlier. Her knuckles whitened on the mop handle. Part of her wanted to run, to vanish back into corridors where no one would look at her twice, to be Lena the cleaning lady again, anonymous, safe. But her legs betrayed her as surely as her ears had. Step, step, step. The sound of her sneakers against the floor echoed louder than it should have. She was moving toward him. Her body decided before her mind agreed. Each stride pulled her deeper into memories she wasn't ready to face. Gasps stirred among the crowd. A young reporter whispered, "What language was that?" Another muttered, "Why is she walking forward?" No one had an answer, not yet. But Lena's answer lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. She walked not just toward the general, but toward a past she had sworn she'd never let surface again. She had promised herself when she traded her medic satchel for a janitor's cart that she would never again answer to those syllables, that she would never again kneel over another bleeding body while the world collapsed around her. And yet she was answering. Because something in the command was more than words. It wasn't an order to fight. It wasn't an order to kill. It was an order to stand, to brace, to remember that courage was possible even in hopelessness. Her throat tightened. The marble hall, polished and ceremonial, flickered against her memory of dirt roads and collapsing shelters. Flash. A soldier thrown over her shoulder. Flash. Bandages unraveling in her hands as she scrambled for more. Flash. A wounded boy, no older than 18, whispering, "Please, don't let me die." She blinked hard. The memories faded, but not completely. The general didn't move from the podium. He didn't acknowledge the murmurs or the confusion. He simply waited, his eyes locked on hers, unblinking, demanding something from her that no one else in the room understood. And she gave it. When she reached him, her voice cracked, but not with weakness, with release. She spoke in that same forgotten tongue, words that tasted foreign and familiar all at once. Medic reporting. The room gasped as if a secret had been unveiled. Soldiers along the walls shifted, uneasy. Reporters scribbled furiously, not even sure how to spell what they were hearing. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that, for the first time in years, she wasn't lying about who she was. The general's eyes softened. The corners of his mouth, firm as stone, twitched with something almost human. He didn't embrace her. He didn't salute. He simply let silence stretch long enough for the room to understand. Something sacred was unfolding. Lena's heart hammered in her chest. Her voice wanted to fail her, but the general's presence steadied it. She gave her name, her old rank, the unit number she had whispered in the dark of triage tents 100 times. Her words fell into the hall like sparks. Some in the audience leaned forward, drawn closer by the invisible gravity of her confession. They had come for a press briefing, a ceremonial address. Instead, they were witnessing a ghost step back into flesh. She told them fragments, not all she couldn't, not yet, but enough. She told them of the night that command had first been spoken, of wounded bodies piling faster than she could treat, of hands slipping in blood as she dragged the living away from fire, of the bitter retreat where survival had felt like betrayal, of running for miles until her lungs tore, choosing life because someone had to live to remember. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. The general listened without interruption. He didn't fill silence with platitudes. He let her words hang heavy, each one pressing into the marble hall until even the most skeptical faces softened. And when she finished, breath ragged, something unspoken passed between them. He stepped from the podium. The metals on his chest glinted as he moved closer, slow and deliberate. His boots clicked against the marble, and then he did something no one expected. He placed his hand on her shoulder, firm, solid, not as a general addressing a subordinate, but as a soldier acknowledging another soldier. "You answered the call when no one else could," he said softly, in the language only they shared. "And you have again today." The words nearly broke her. For years, she had wondered if what she had done mattered. If the screams she couldn't silence, the lives she couldn't save, had canceled out the ones she had. She had hidden in the shadows of normal life because the weight of memory was too heavy to carry in daylight. But now this hand on her shoulder, this acknowledgement, pulled her out of hiding. The crowd, still bewildered, erupted. Applause, at first hesitant, swelled until it became a wave. Not for the general, for her, for the nameless woman with the mop who had been invisible until this moment. Lena's throat tightened. She wanted to vanish. She wanted to run. But the general's hand kept her steady. And in that applause, she felt something she hadn't in years. Not pride, not glory, something quieter. Something that whispered you didn't disappear. What you gave, your pain, your nights, your years, it mattered. She blinked back tears. The applause softened. And then, as quietly as she had come forward, she turned. She walked back toward her mop, back toward the life she had built in shadows. But the hall felt different now. Not cold, not empty. She knew people would ask questions tomorrow. She knew whispers would follow her down the corridors. But tonight, for the first time in years, she could breathe. Because the past she thought had died had just stood in front of her, alive. And instead of crushing her, it had given her back something she thought she'd lost forever. Herself. Why had she run that night, when so many others stayed? The question pulsed at the back of Lena's mind long after the applause faded, long after she had slipped back behind the curtain of invisibility. She wheeled her cleaning cart through the echoing corridors, but every squeak of its wheels seemed to summon ghosts. She was supposed to feel lighter after what happened in the hall. Instead, her chest carried a new weight, an old one she thought she'd buried. She replayed the sound of the general's voice, the warmth of his hand on her shoulder. Those eyes, steady, unwavering, had once been the only anchor in a world collapsing around her. But with them came everything else. The smell of iron in the air, the relentless tremor of artillery, the prayers whispered by soldiers who knew they would not live till dawn. She had promised herself never to go back there, and yet memory ignored promises. Her mop handle had become a rifle again, her gray uniform a medic's fatigues, her sneakers mud-soaked boots. She blinked, and she was no longer in the marble hall. She was there, the night the order was first barked. The horizon glowed orange where villages burned. The ground shook with distant blasts. Lena crouched in a makeshift triage tent, sweat and dust streaking her face. Her satchel was already empty of morphine. She had torn her own undershirt into strips for bandages. The wounded came in waves, carried on stretchers, dragged by brothers in arms, crawling on their own elbows. And she, 20 years old, barely trained, her hands trembling, was the last line between them and death. She pressed her palms hard against a soldier's wound. Blood pulsed hot and steady between her fingers. "Stay with me," she begged, but his eyes were already fatting. The tent flap burst open. The general stormed inside, though then he was not a general, just a commanding officer with dust in his beard and fury in his voice. He barked the command that later echoed through the marble hall. Sharp, urgent, unmistakable. Hold the line. Not to her, not to any single soldier, but to all of them. It was the rally cry, a phrase meant to cut through terror, to remind them that retreat was not collapse, that even wounded, even broken, they still stood. She had looked up at him in that moment, blood on her hands, and for a flicker of a second she had believed him, believed they could hold the line. But they hadn't. The memory shifted. The tent was breached. Chaos tore through order. She remembered dragging 3 wounded men out the back, bullets snapping past her ears. She remembered carrying one on her back until her knees buckled, forcing herself to rise again because leaving him was not an option. And she remembered, most of all, when she had run. She didn't choose it, her body did. The retreat turned to collapse. Fire swallowed the tents. She had run through fields lit by tracer rounds, lungs screaming until the noise fell behind her. Survival had felt like treason. She woke from the memory with her back against a supply closet door, hands shaking as though still slick with blood. The cleaning cart rattled against the tiles, abandoned mid-hall. She slid to the floor. The applause from earlier still echoed in her ears, clashing against the cries of dying soldiers that never left her. Pride and shame wrestled inside her, each refusing to yield. The general was alive. She had believed him dead all these years. His presence proved her past was not just trauma conjured by nightmares. It was history, shared, witnessed. But what would he do now? Did he remember her as clearly as she remembered him? Or was she just another nameless medic who had done her duty and vanished? Her chest tightened. She had seen his eyes. She knew the answer. He remembered. And that frightened her more than being forgotten ever had. Because remembering meant there were still debts between them. That night she had survived when others hadn't. She had left when others stayed. She had carried stories that were not hers alone. And now, standing in a marble hall among cameras and dignitaries, she had spoken those stories aloud. For the first time in years she felt seen. And with that came a terrible fear. If the truth continued to spill out, would the world judge her as a survivor or as a deserter? Her head fell into her hands. She wanted to be Lena the cleaning lady again, invisible, unquestioned, free of expectation. But something inside her whispered otherwise. That command had pulled her forward once more, and maybe, just maybe, it meant she was not finished. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She startled, dragging herself back into the fluorescent glow of the supply closet. A message from an unknown number. Just one line. Meet me, midnight north entrance. No signature, no explanation. But she didn't need one. She knew exactly whose voice had written it. The general. Her stomach knotted. Why her? Why now? She could ignore it, pretend it never arrived, slip back into silence, but she already knew she wouldn't. Because the war she thought she had escaped was calling her name again. And this time, running would not erase it. Why would a general wait for a cleaning lady in the dead of night? The question gnawed at Lena as she stood in the shadows near the north entrance. Midnight had emptied the government complex of life. The marble floors that bustled by day now stretched silent under a pale wash of security lights. Her mop and cart were locked away, her uniform traded for a plain jacket. She looked like any other tired woman waiting for a bus that never came. But her heartbeat betrayed her disguise. Every echo of boots in the distance made her tense. Every sweep of headlights from the street sent her nerves sparking. She told herself she shouldn't have come, that a message with no signature could have been a mistake, a trap, even a cruel prank. Yet deep down she knew, she had always known. The figure appeared at exactly 000. Tall, shoulders squared, the weight of command clinging to him like a second uniform. He wasn't dressed for ceremony now, but even in dark fatigues, he carried authority in the way he moved. Boots striking marble, hands clasped behind his back. The night seemed to part for him. Lena swallowed. The general stopped 3 paces away. His eyes, though softened from the harsh glare of the hall, still pierced. He studied her in silence, and the quiet stretched so long she nearly turned to leave. Then he spoke. You heard the command. It wasn't a question. Lena looked down at her shoes. I remembered, she whispered. Her voice sounded smaller than she wanted. I thought I'd never hear it again. The general nodded once slowly. Neither did I. The air between them thickened. Lena wanted to fill it with something, anything, but words tangled in her throat. The general seemed in no rush. He let silence work on her, the same way he had once steadied her in chaos. Finally, he stepped closer. I called it because I needed to know if anyone was still alive who remembered. Lena's chest tightened. And you found me. I found more than that, he said. His gaze flickered over her as if seeing past the plain jacket, past the quiet janitor life she had wrapped herself in. I found someone who stood when no one else understood. That means you're still a soldier, whether you want to be or not. The word struck harder than she expected. Soldier. She hadn't been called that in years. She had scrubbed that identity from herself, tried to dissolve it in detergent and long hours of anonymity. But hearing it from him brought it all rushing back, like a dam breaking. Her jaw clenched. I'm not a soldier anymore. Then why did you step forward? He asked, steady. You could have stayed silent, no one would have known, but you didn't. Lena had no answer, her breath fogged in the cold air, uneven. I don't know why, she said finally. Habit, reflex, stupidity. The general shook his head. Instinct, that's not something you lose, not if you've bled for it. The word bled twisted in her gut. She remembered the faces, some saved, some not. She remembered how survival itself had felt like betrayal, and she remembered running. Her voice broke before she could stop it. I left them, that night. I ran while others stayed. You, she forced herself to look at him. You must have seen it, you must have known I deserted. His eyes didn't flinch. He let her confession hang in the night. Then he said quietly, I saw you carrying 2 men twice your size across open ground. I saw you kneeling in firelight with your hands inside wounds no one else would touch. And yes, I saw you run. Do you know why? Her throat closed, she shook her head. Because you were the last medic standing. Because you had no weapon, no cover, no hope. And because someone had to live. The words hit her harder than any bullet. For years she had carried shame like a second skin. She had convinced herself her survival was cowardice. Yet here he stood, refusing to condemn her. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. The general's jaw tightened. Because the past isn't done with us. There's something coming. Something that requires people who don't just follow orders, they remember what it costs. Lena felt the ground tilt beneath her. What are you asking me? His eyes met hers, unwavering. I'm asking if you're willing to be seen again, not as a cleaner, not as a ghost, but as who you were and who you still are. Her chest heaved. She wanted to say no, to turn, to vanish into the night, to crawl back into the safety of obscurity. But deep inside, another voice whispered, the same voice that had carried her through smoke and screams long ago. Stand. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to nod once. I'll listen. The general's eyes softened, just barely. Good, then listen carefully. Tomorrow everything changes. And with that he turned, footsteps echoing into the dark. Lena stood frozen, breath clouding in the cold air. Tomorrow, the word reverberated through her. She didn't know what he meant, what was coming, or why he had chosen her. But she knew this. The life she had built in shadows was gone. Because when the past calls your name, silence is no longer an option. What could possibly change in a single day? That was the question haunting Lena the next morning. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the memory of the general's face, his words replayed. Tomorrow, everything changes. She had tried to convince herself it was nothing. An old soldier's dramatics, a courtesy meeting, nothing more. But the hall felt different when she stepped into it that morning with her mop and cart. It wasn't just her own nerves, the air itself seemed charged. Security was doubled. Doors that normally stood open were guarded. She caught snippets of hushed conversations, staffers whispering in corners, glancing toward the stage where the general was once again present, though not speaking. Something was happening. And she wasn't the only one who felt it. Reporters had gathered earlier than usual, their cameras primed. Young soldiers lined the walls again, but they were tense now, their boots tapping in restless rhythm. Lena pushed her cart slowly, pretending to work, though every muscle in her body strained toward the podium. When the general finally stood, silence rippled instantly. He didn't bark this time. His voice came low, steady, each syllable clipped with weight. We are not here for ceremony, he said. We are here for truth. Gasps scattered through the audience. Lena's pulse quickened. He didn't explain further. Instead, he turned his gaze, not to the cameras, not to the soldiers, but to her. The world seemed to tilt. Dozens of eyes followed his line of sight until they landed on the woman with the mop. She froze mid-swipe. The cart rattled faintly as her grip faltered. Whispers surged. Her again. Who is she? Why is he? The general raised a hand, silencing them. Then he spoke in that same foreign tongue, the one only she had understood. Step forward. Her legs felt cemented. Her mind screamed no, but her body moved anyway, as if the command pulled her by invisible cords. Step, step, step. The marble floor stretched endlessly. By the time she reached him, her breath was shallow, her palms slick with sweat. The general looked at her, not unkindly, but with a weight that demanded courage. You told part of your story yesterday, he said softly. Today, I ask you to tell the rest. Lena's throat constricted. Cameras clicked. Murmurs hissed around her. She wanted to sink into the floor. But the general's voice, steady and firm, left no space for retreat. Her chest rose and fell. And then she spoke. Not in English, not for the reporters. She spoke in that old language, the one that tied her to the general and to a war no one here understood. Her words weren't polished, they cracked, they stuttered, but they carried truth. She spoke of the night the line had broken, of patching wounds by flashlight, of dragging soldiers through mud, of shouting until her voice failed. She admitted the part she had never spoken aloud, that she had run, terrified, with the sound of dying men behind her. A hush fell so deep it pressed against her ears. She expected condemnation, ridicule. She braced for it. Instead, the general's voice rose again, not in rebuke but in resonance. And yet here she stands, He turned to the crowd. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action in spite of it. This woman carried more weight in one night than most of us will in a lifetime. She ran, yes, but running kept her alive, and survival, too, is service. Applause erupted again, but it wasn't like yesterday. This was heavier, more complex. Some clapped with awe, others reluctantly, as if struggling with what they had just heard. Lena felt her heart hammer against her ribs. But then, movement at the back of the hall. Two men in plain suits whispered to security, pointing toward her. She caught the gesture. She recognized the type, not journalists, not staff. Intelligence. Her gut twisted. The general noticed too. His jaw tightened. He leaned toward her, voice barely audible. "Stay calm. They'll want to speak with you after this. Don't go with them alone." Her blood ran cold. "Why?" "Because they don't want your story told," he murmured. His eyes burned into hers. "And because this is bigger than you think." The applause masked their exchange, but Lena's heart sank. Bigger than she thought. How much bigger could it get? She had been invisible for years. Now she was being dragged into the light, into a storm she hadn't chosen. The general turned back to the podium, speaking of service, sacrifice, resilience. His voice thundered, drawing the crowd's attention away from her. But Lena barely heard. Her mind spun. Why had he summoned her now in front of everyone? Why expose her, a ghost from a forgotten war? And why were intelligence officers suddenly circling like vultures? She thought of the message last night. Tomorrow everything changes. And she realized with a jolt of dread it already had. When the hall finally dismissed, Lena tried to slip out a side door, but the two men in suits blocked her path. One smiled, thin and professional. "Miss Lena, is it?" His voice was smooth, but it carried the sharpness of someone used to control. "We'd like a word." Her stomach churned. The general's warning echoed in her head. "Don't go with them alone." She forced a steady voice. "I have work." The man's smile didn't fade. "This won't take long." His partner stepped closer, his hand brushing the edge of his coat where a badge gleamed. Official. Government, but not friendly. Lena's breath quickened. She glanced around. No one was watching, no one cared. She was just the cleaning lady, except she wasn't anymore. Then a shadow fell across them. "The general," he said, his tone calm but edged like steel. "Miss Lena is under my protection. If you need to speak with her, you go through me first." The suit stiffened. They exchanged a look, then one muttered, "Of course, sir. Another time." They stepped back, but their eyes lingered on her like marks on a map. The general didn't look away until they had gone. Then he turned to her, his voice low. "They'll be back." Lena's hand shook. "Why me? I don't understand." "You will," he said grimly. "But you need to be ready. What's coming isn't ceremony. It's survival, and this time you don't get to run." Her breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to shove the weight back on his shoulders where it belonged. But deep down, she knew. The moment she stepped forward at his command, her days of invisibility had ended. And tomorrow, the real tomorrow, was already on its way. What if this was all a mistake? That thought gnawed at Lena as she sat in the dim cafeteria hours after the confrontation. The building was nearly empty now. Most staff had gone home, but she lingered, staring at a cup of untouched coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above, casting shadows that seemed too long, too watchful. She hadn't been able to return to work. Her mop stood abandoned in a supply closet, bucket water already turning stale. She couldn't scrub floors when her mind was drowning in questions. Why had the general dragged her into this? Why had those men in suits looked at her like a target? And why after all these years, was she suddenly visible? Her hands trembled around the coffee cup. She hated that. She had promised herself she wouldn't shake anymore. Not in public, not where anyone could see. The chair across from her scraped against the tile. She looked up, startled. The general. Even without his uniform, his presence filled the space. He wore a simple coat now, but his eyes carried the same weight they always had. He sat without asking permission, his movements deliberate, quiet. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said. Lena tried to steady her voice. "I'm not used to being noticed." His gaze softened just barely, "And yet here you are." Her throat tightened. "Those men, who are they?" The general leaned back, folding his arms. For a moment he seemed to choose his words carefully. "Not enemies, not exactly, but not allies either. They serve interests, not people. And right now you're inconvenient." "Inconvenient?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. "I'm a janitor, I mop floors. I don't even exist to most people here." "Exactly," he said evenly. "Until yesterday, and now you're something else. Proof." The word lodged in her chest. Proof of what? He studied her, eyes narrowing. "When you stepped forward, you reminded them of something they want to forget. That war isn't just medals and speeches. That it leaves scars. That ordinary people carry the weight long after the battles are done." Her pulse thudded. "And that makes me a threat." "To some, yes." Silence stretched. Lena gripped her coffee cup harder, though her hand still shook. Finally she whispered, "Why me?" The general's voice lowered. "Because you lived, because you carry truth, and because I can't fight this alone." Her chest tightened painfully. She wanted to refuse, to walk away, to bury herself again in the safe anonymity of bleach and tile. But his eyes held her there, steady, unyielding. And beneath the fear, something stirred. A spark she thought she had extinguished long ago. "You don't understand," she said, voice breaking. "I ran that night, I left people behind I don't deserve." He cut her off. "You survived. That's not desertion. That's duty in its form. Sometimes the hardest order is the one no one gives. Live so someone remembers." Her breath hitched. For years she had carried the shame of survival like a brand. But hearing him reframe it, calling it duty, it cracked something inside her. Still doubt gnawed. "If I stay close to you, if I let them see me, won't I just become a pawn?" The general leaned forward, his voice low, fierce. "Not if you decide what your story is. Not if you choose to stand." Lena's eyes stung. She blinked hard, unwilling to let tears betray her. Before she could answer, movement at the cafeteria entrance caught her eye. Two shadows, the suits. They hadn't left after all. The general noticed too. His posture stiffened, calm but coiled. He rose slowly, placing himself between her and the door. The men approached, their polished shoes clicking against the tile. "General," one of them said smoothly, "we need a word with your associate." "She's not your concern," the general replied flatly. The man's smile didn't fade. "Everything that happens in this building is our concern. Surely you understand." His gaze slid past the general to Lena, pinning her like an insect. "Miss, would you walk with us? Just a few questions." Her chest seized. Words stuck in her throat. She wanted to disappear into the floor. The general's voice sharpened. "She's not answering questions tonight." The taller suit tilted his head, studying him. "You can't protect her forever." Something electric crackled in the silence that followed. Lena's heart raced so hard she thought it might give her away. Finally, the suits turned, footsteps fading back into the hall, but the warning in their eyes lingered. When they were gone, Lena exhaled a shudder she hadn't realized she was holding. The general looked back at her. "This is just the beginning." Her voice trembled. "I'm not ready for this." He studied her, steady and calm. "No one ever is." The cafeteria lights flickered, buzzing faintly. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, as if holding her body together. "Why now?" she asked softly. "Why not leave me where I was? Why drag me into this?" The general's answer was quiet, but it carried the weight of command. "Because survival isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning." His words sank into her, heavy, unshakable. And for the first time, Lena wondered if maybe he was right. But if this was the beginning, what came next? What would happen if she just walked away? The thought pressed harder than ever as Lena stood in her small apartment, staring at the mop leaning against the wall. It had always been her shield. With it, she blended into the background, erased herself, became no one worth noticing. For years, it had protected her better than any weapon. Now it looked useless, fragile, a relic of a lie. She rubbed her temples. The general's words wouldn't leave her. Survival isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning. She wanted to reject them, to insist that survival had been enough, that living quietly, cleaning floors, hurting no one was enough. But her chest ached with the truth she couldn't bury. Hiding had never silenced the memories. It had only locked them inside her. She moved to the window. Outside, the city stretched beneath a dark sky. Cars hummed faintly in the distance, but the street below was empty, too empty. Her stomach dropped. A black sedan idled across the street. Tinted windows, engine running, no lights on. Her pulse spiked. She yanked the curtain closed, but the image seared in her mind. They were watching. The suits hadn't given up. Her phone buzzed. She flinched, then checked. A single message, no name. Are you ready to choose? Her knees nearly buckled. She sank into the chair by her table, clutching the phone. She didn't need a signature. She knew it was him, the general. Her throat tightened to choose. The word terrified her because it left no space for hiding. She pressed her palms against the table, whispering into the silence, I don't want this. But deep down, another voice answered, Then why did you step forward? Her chest heaved. She thought of the men in suits, circling like predators. She thought of the general standing between them and her, unyielding. And she thought of the applause in the hall, the sound of strangers recognizing something in her she had convinced herself was gone. Maybe she hadn't stepped forward by accident. The knock at her door nearly stopped her heart. 3 sharp raps, firm, too firm to be a neighbor. She froze, staring. Another knock followed. Miss Lena, a voice called, smooth, too smooth. We need a word. Her stomach twisted, the suits. She backed away from the door, breath shallow. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Don't open it, back door now. Her pulse roared in her ears. Without thinking, she grabbed her jacket and slipped into the kitchen, unlocking the back door as quietly as possible. Cold air rushed in. She stepped into the alley, heart hammering, and nearly collided with him. The general. He motioned quickly, this way. She followed, feet moving before her mind caught up. The alley twisted into a side street, then into shadows beyond the reach of lamps. Only when they had crossed 2 blocks did he slow. Her breath came ragged. They were at my door. I know, he said calmly. That's why I told you not to stay alone. Her voice cracked. I didn't ask for this. His eyes, though steady, carried something heavy. Neither did I, but here we are. They walked in silence until they reached a quiet parking lot. A nondescript vehicle waited. The general opened the passenger door. You have a choice, he said. Get in or walk away. Her legs locked. This was it. The line she had been circling since that first command rang through the marble hall. Step forward or step back into shadows. Her heart screamed to retreat, to run, to vanish back into the safe rhythm of bleach and tile, to surrender to anonymity, to let someone else carry the burden. But another voice, quieter, older, rose inside her. The voice of the medic kneeling in mud, pressing her hands against wounds, refusing to let go until the last possible breath. The voice of the girl who had survived. And the voice that still echoed in her ears, hold the line. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door handle. She pulled it open, slid inside. The general closed the door after her, then walked around and took the driver's seat. As the engine hummed to life, Lena felt her chest tighten. Fear churned with something else, something she hadn't felt in years. Resolve. The general glanced at her, his face unreadable in the dim light. You just made the hardest decision, The rest will only get harder. Her throat tightened. Where are we going? He shifted into gear, to the place where the past isn't finished. The car rolled into the night, leaving her empty apartment and her old life behind. And as the city lights blurred past, Lena knew one truth with brutal clarity. She had crossed the line. There was no going back. What kind of place hides in plain sight? The question rattled in Lena's mind as the car rolled off the main road and down a narrow, unmarked path. The headlights cut through thick trees, revealing little but shadows. Her pulse raced harder with every turn. She wanted to ask where they were going, but the general's silence was ironclad, his focus fixed on the dark road ahead. Finally, the trees broke. A squat concrete building stood at the edge of a clearing, its windows blacked out, its walls with weather. No sign, no markings. The kind of place designed to be overlooked. The general parked and killed the engine. We're here. Lena stared. What is this? He opened his door, stepping out. The past and maybe the future. Her chest tightened. She followed him, the cold night biting at her face. A heavy steel door loomed before them. The general swiped a card and the lock clicked. He held it open, his eyes on her. Once you step inside, there's no turning back. Her throat was dry, but she stepped through. The air inside was cooler, laced with disinfectant and old stone. Hallways stretched in sterile silence, lined with closed doors. A hum of fluorescent lights filled the emptiness. The general led her deeper until voices echoed faintly ahead. They entered a wide room, part briefing chamber, part infirmary. Tables were scattered with maps and files. Medical supplies were stacked against one wall. And people were waiting. Half a dozen men and women turned as Lena entered. Soldiers, though not in uniform. Their faces carried fatigue, scars, the hard edge of experience. Some wore civilian clothes, others faded fatigues without insignia. Their eyes studied her with quiet curiosity, suspicion even. One woman, tall with streaks of gray in her hair, crossed her arms. This is her. The general nodded. This is Lena. The room seemed to weigh on her name. Lena shifted, wishing she could shrink back into the walls. A younger man with a bandaged hand spoke, his voice edged with disbelief. She's the cleaner. Was, the general corrected. Now she's here. The weight of their stares pressed into her chest. She wanted to protest, to tell them she didn't belong, but before she could, the general motioned toward a chair. Sit. She obeyed, her legs weak. He stood before the group, his presence commanding. You all know why we're here. The world outside believes wars end when the treaties are signed, when the cameras leave. But we know better. We know scars linger, and some scars fester. His gaze swept the room, then landed on Lena. She carries those scars. She lived through the night most of us thought none survived. And now, those who want the truth buried are watching her. That means she matters. Lena's throat tightened. She didn't want this weight. But the way he said it, steady, without hesitation, pulled at something deep inside her. The gray-haired woman leaned forward. And what exactly are we supposed to do with her? She's not a fighter. Lena flinched. The general didn't waver. No, she's more than that, she's a witness. The word rang through the room. Some frowned, others nodded slowly. Lena's palms sweated. A witness. To what? To horror, to survival, to truths no one wanted spoken aloud. The general's eyes softened as he looked at her. I didn't bring you here to fight, Lena. I brought you here to remember, and to help us make sure memory isn't erased. Her chest ached. Why me? Why not one of them? She gestured weakly toward the faces watching her. They're stronger, they stayed, I ran. Silence pressed for a moment. Then the general said firmly, because you ran and lived, and survival has a voice all its own. Her eyes burned. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall in front of strangers. The gray-haired woman's voice softened. Can she even handle it? The general looked at Lena. That's why she's here, to find out. Before Lena could ask what that meant, the infirmary doors opened. A soldier entered on crutches, his leg bound, his face lined with pain. He glanced at her, then at the general. "It's starting again, isn't it?" The general nodded grimly. "Yes." A chill spread through Lena's body. "Starting again." The soldier limped closer, his eyes locking on her. "Do you still know how to hold pressure on a wound?" The question caught her off guard. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She saw the blood on his bandages, the tremor in his hands. Memory slammed into her, nights of wrapping wounds with shaking fingers, the copper smell clinging to her skin, the desperate whisper of dying boys. Her hands trembled, but slowly she nodded. "Yes." The soldier held out his crutch, steadying himself. "Then start there." The room seemed to tilt. For years she had mopped away stains. Now she was being asked to face them again, living, bleeding, real. Her chest tightened. Part of her wanted to collapse, but another part, quieter, steadier, rose up. The part that had carried men twice her size through gunfire. The part that had survived when survival seemed impossible. She pushed back her chair. "Show me what needs done." The general's eyes glinted with something close to pride. The others watched in silence as Lena stepped toward the soldier. Her hands shook, but she steadied them, pressing lightly against his bandaged leg, checking the wrap, tightening where it had loosened. The old instincts came back, not perfect, but not forgotten either. The soldier winced but didn't pull away. "You haven't lost it," he muttered. Lena's throat ached. "I thought I had." The general's voice was quiet, certain. "Some things never leave you." As Lena worked, the room's suspicion softened. She wasn't a cleaner anymore. She wasn't just a ghost dragged out of hiding. She was part of something again, though what exactly she still didn't know. When she finished, her hands trembled, but her chest felt different. Lighter, heavier, both at once. She looked at the general. His eyes held hers. "This is just the beginning. Tomorrow you'll see why." Her breath caught. She wanted to ask what tomorrow held, but the answer was clear in his gaze. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be safe. It would be a reckoning. What does it mean to come back from the dead? Lena asked herself that question as dawn crept through the trees outside the concrete facility. She hadn't slept. She had spent the night sitting in a folding chair by the infirmary, listening to the faint murmurs of wounded men and women in nearby rooms. Their breathing, their quiet groans, their restless movements, it all dragged her back to the triage tents of her youth. She pressed her palms together, trembling. It felt cruel, as if time had folded in on itself. Years spent hiding, trying to smother the past, and here she was, living in its shadow once again. The general found her just after sunrise. He carried 2 cups of coffee, setting one in front of her. His voice was steady, but softer than before. "Did you sleep?" She shook her head. He studied her a long moment, then sat across from her. "Today you'll understand why you're here." Her chest tightened. "You keep saying that, but you never explain." He nodded as though accepting her frustration. "Because some truths can't be explained. They have to be faced." Before she could respond, the gray-haired woman from last night entered, a folder in hand. She set it on the table, sliding it toward Lena. "Read." Lena hesitated, then flipped it open. The pages were dense with names, dates, places, reports, photos. She skimmed and froze. Faces. Some she recognized. Men and women she had once bandaged in the dirt. Soldiers she thought had vanished into history. Their names were listed beside cold statistics, missing, presumed dead. Others carried notes, detained, silenced, erased. Her breath hitched. She turned another page. And there her own face. A grainy photograph of her in uniform, hair tucked under a medic's cap, eyes wide with exhaustion. Below it, status, unknown, presumed deceased. Her vision blurred. "They buried me," she whispered. The general's voice was calm but sharp with meaning. "Not just you, all of us. That war was rewritten. The official story is clean. No collapse, no chaos, no survivors left behind. Anyone who carried the truth either died or disappeared. Her hands trembled on the folder, and now they know the truth isn't gone, he said. You proved it when you stepped forward in that hall, and they will do whatever it takes to silence you. Her stomach churned. I didn't ask for this. No one asks, the general said quietly, but the choice is always the same, hide or stand. Her eyes burned. And if I stand, what happens to me? He didn't answer. Silence fell heavy. The gray-haired woman broke it at last. We all lost something out there. Family, comrades, homes. But we carried scars for a reason. We carried them so no one could pretend it never happened. If you walk away now, they'll erase it again. Lena pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. The weight of it all pressed down, the folder, the faces, the years of silence. Why her, why now? Because she had lived. Her chest heaved. For so long she had seen her survival as shame, but maybe it was responsibility. She closed the folder with shaking hands. What do you want me to do? The general's gaze softened. Tell the story, not to me, not to the suits, to the world. They won't believe us without proof, but they might believe you because you were ordinary, you were invisible, and that makes your truth harder to ignore. Her throat closed. To speak meant exposure. It meant danger. It meant stepping into a storm she had avoided for years. But to stay silent meant betraying every name in that folder. The room held its breath, waiting. Lena's voice broke as she whispered, "Then I'll stand." The general's eyes glistened. He nodded once, as though sealing something sacred. The day unfolded in fragments, preparations, discussions, a plan forming to bring the truth into light. Lena listened, learned, faltered, but didn't break. She tended to the wounded as she always had, her hands steadying even when her heart wavered. And when fear clawed at her, she remembered the general's hand on her shoulder, the command that had pulled her forward. By nightfall, she stood outside the facility, staring at the horizon. The world beyond the trees felt vast, merciless. She had no illusions about what awaited. The suits would return. The powerful would resist. She might lose her freedom, even her life. But she wasn't alone anymore. The general stepped beside her, silent for a long time. Then he said, "When I barked that command in the hall, I didn't know if anyone would answer. I thought the line was broken forever, but you proved me wrong." Lena's eyes stung. She turned toward him, her voice raw. "I thought I had nothing left." He shook his head. "You have everything left, because courage doesn't end when the war does. It waits, and when the moment comes, it rises again." She let the words sink into her. They didn't erase the pain, they didn't heal the wounds, but they gave them meaning. The night deepened. Lena stood taller, her breath steady. For years she had hidden in the quiet corners of life, convincing herself that silence was safety. But now she understood. Silence was surrender. And she was done surrendering. She thought of the men and women whose faces filled the folder, of the soldiers who had died in her arms, whispering their last words, of the ones who had never been buried, never been named. Their stories would not vanish, not if she had breath left to speak them. The general placed a hand on her shoulder once more, firm and steady. "Tomorrow we begin." Lena nodded. "I'm ready." The words surprised her. They felt foreign on her tongue, but true. She gazed out into the dark horizon, and for the first time in years, the silence inside her broke. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.